Good morning.
Good morning.
We're on and ready to go.
All right.
So would you like to introduce us or shall I?
Sure. Good morning to all of y'all who are joining us. This is Are You There, God? Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil, I think.
I was going to say, are you sure that's what we are?
Oh. And
we're doing fine. We're doing fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about us.
I'm Kira Austin Young. I am the priest in charge of St. Anne's Episcopal Church in Nashville, Tennessee.
Nash Vegas. And I'm Philip Taval. I'm rector of Church of the Redeemer in Cincinnati, Ohio, the queen of the Midwest, the city, not me. I have not been given any royal status to this point. But we are here with you and everybody that's joining us, welcome. And Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. We're going to talk to each other and talk to you about, kind of whatever you want to talk about, but we do have a couple of ideas of things we want to talk about today.
We've got some ideas about, but Phil, I've been thinking a lot about you because, we are in the portion of the Revised Common Lectionary that is sometimes known as the Summer of Bread. And we've got a lot of bread discourse and bread talk in the lectionary for the last few weeks and in the weeks to come. So I've been thinking about you and your hobby of bread baking. And I was kind of wondering how has that been like a spiritual practice for you? Like
making bread.
It's not just fun and you don't just
it's definitely, right? Can you hear me, by the way? I switched microphones.
Yes.
Okay. It's definitely, at the risk of being that guy, it's definitely a spiritual exercise for me. It's very much a part of the thing. It's very much a part of what makes me feel, I don't know how to describe it. Let me take a step back. A year ago, I started making bread. Because, and I would love to do, actually, it would be fun to talk about, I've been thinking about writing about how during COVID, I started making bread. I gained a bunch of weight and I got a dog. And I'm like, those are all the things people joke about people doing, especially like guys, especially white guys. Like I'm sort of following the white guy COVID trend. But I'd love to talk about each. It's like, I want to be like, oh yeah, no, I'm a total stereotype. But then look at how each one of those came about, because
right.
Why are they happening to a lot of people?
Right. There's also reasons for kind of stereotypes.
I wasn't like, hey, it's COVID, I'd love to gain 40 pounds. It was more like I have lifelong eating issues, and oftentimes they manifest themselves in stress eating and comfort eating and all that stuff. And this has been unquestionably the most excruciating, stressful, and awful time in my adulthood. Mm-hmm. So shocking. And I couldn't go to the gym because it was, a super spreader event. So, I'm not an outside guy. Outside's fine. I was just there. It's still working outside. Right before I was here, I was outside and the air was working and you could breathe and it's great. It's lovely.
Well, you weren't doing CrossFit in your driveway.
And I have friends that they were like, oh man, I really got into CrossFit, or I really used this time. And I'm just like, God bless. That was not me.
We all deal with our stress in different ways, right?
Yeah. Well, and I actually had the gym not been off limits. I was 4 or 5 times a day, sometimes, or 4 or 5 times a week, or sometimes 6 times a week. And I'd go and I want to get on a machine. People hate machines. Oh, it's so boring. I want to look at nature. No, I get on a machine. I put headphones in my ears and I read a book while I'm working out. I sweat like crazy for 45 minutes to an hour. And I get to read and be in my own little world. And I tricked my body into working out. It didn't even know it was happening. Oh, what did you make me do? If I strap on some hiking shoes and go outdoors, my body's already like, I know what this is. Don't try pulling this on me. There's not even one cheeseburger out here. I don't buy it. So I have to trick my body. So that was tough. And then the dog thing, my dog died and we got a new dog because we don't know how to function without a dog in our house. But the bread thing I've been thinking about for a while. So I've had a really messed up relationship with carbohydrates. Yeah.
Same.
So I've been dealing with weight stuff and dieting issues and dieting being a part of my life pretty much since I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
Not a teenager, a child. And when I was in college was the first time I discovered quote unquote Atkins.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at the dining hall eating double bacon cheeseburgers with no bun and losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great because when it's not about health, it's about weight. And all you think about is weight. Man, it was great. But then with the success of that, anytime after that, if I was eating bread, I was off a diet and out of control. And if I was not eating bread, then I was on a diet and in control. So bread and all of the carbohydrate family, as it were, like got a really bad rap in my life. Is this something you relate to?
Yeah, I actually I preached a little bit about this on Sunday.
Oh yeah?
In a very a vulnerable for me way. I didn't entirely feel comfortable talking about it, but I did it anyway. Yeah, I don't want to trigger anybody's eating issues out there, but sure. I certainly have dealt with kind of whatever freight, it goes through the culture, right? We had Atkins, now we have keto, there was paleo, any kind of like low carb diet eating plan are often quite effective at helping people to lose weight and are less effective at being a reasonable eating plan that you can sustain for your entire life.
Right.
Because what people like bread and rice and pasta and potatoes, all of those foods are like staples of almost every culture around the world, right? Like there's hardly maybe like some of the native Inuit people, mostly eat kind of a naturally lower carb diet, but those are all foods that are kind of backbones of cultures around the world. And so to kind of say like, oh, I'm no longer going to eat these foods, similar to you, like it was like, okay, I can do this. I don't eat bread. I don't eat rice. I don't eat pasta, pizza, sandwiches without the buns or the bread, like
all the time,
all that stuff. And, and then I like started to kind of really, like I internalized that, right? That like bread was bad.
Bread's bad.
But at the same time, like I'm a priest and what do I do every Sunday? But I bless and I break and I offer bread to the people. And in my head, I was thinking like, there's like a major disconnect here, right? Like I'm having like a real spiritual issue and the eating plan that I was kind of either on or kind of basing my eating off of.
Right.
I remember seeing like a forum and somebody said like, well, what about communion? Like, can I eat communion on this plan? Because it has two things that are not allowed on this plan, one being wine and the second being bread. And they were kind of like, well, I mean, ritual consumption of elements is fine, but like, just don't do it a lot, basically.
Right. Don't overdo that communion.
Like that should have been like a major red flag for me, I feel.
I went the other direction with you where I started resenting Jesus for saying, I am the bread of life.
Yeah.
I was resentful of our Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
Because he was getting in the way of me losing weight.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. I was like, does this really have to be in there? Like of all the things in the world, you had to choose bread and wine? Like
right. Could have been I am the meat of life. Like meat is important. Like we could get rid of all the vegan conversation because it's like Jesus said it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm with you. It was tough. I started and I'm still, I mean, like my relationship with food is going to be complicated for the rest of my life. That's something that I'm recognizing. And that like, if I don't, it's not just that if I don't like pay attention, I'll gain a little bit of weight. It's that if I don't pay attention, I start to just get out of control and I don't feel good physically. Like, it's not just how I feel about how I look. It's like literally like indigestion every night when I go to bed. Like, that's not a thing you're supposed to feel. That's not okay. Right. So I have figured out that I do need to be similarly to like being on a budget, right? I can't just spend whatever I want. I have to figure out how to, I've got to figure out how to budget my food in a way that keeps me kind of sane, right? Like, because it's an unhealthy addictive relationship and I have to think carefully about how I do it. But a couple years back, I was doing this one diet I won't name, and they go through this whole thing where they're just like, you've been told bread is bad. It's just not bad. Like, it's just not bad. And like, you've got to, like, bread in your diet is okay. You've got to, like, we're counting calories, so count them, like, to acknowledge they exist, but like, don't demonize bread, you know? And so anyways, I started incorporating like sandwiches back into my life. That's it. Just sandwiches. And then I was just like, oh my gosh, I love bread so much.
Sandwiches are so good.
Sandwiches are amazing.
And I was like,
by the way, this is your priest's revelation today, friends. Sandwiches are amazing.
Like, I was really grieving a lot of the foods that I wasn't allowed to have. I wouldn't allow myself to have.
Yep.
You know, a good tomato sandwich, like with fresh ripe tomatoes.
You'd be like, nope, can't do it.
Yeah, like
them carbs.
I know. It was a real loss and like a real grief until I was like, I can have these things. Like, it's fine.
Yep. So I started watching this show during that. So I started cooking during the pandemic. Comfort food, a lot of stuff, baking cookies and making good cookies, like really doing good stuff that I was happy with. And I started working, like, this sounds so silly, but like another carb that I wasn't eating, I started to eat was rice. Turns out rice is delicious.
Rice is also very good.
It's fantastic. And as you pointed out, a staple in many, many, many cultures. And we're like, oh, can't have rice. It's bad for you. That's starch. So I just want to say, by the way, I'm really glad that your dog is protecting you from all of the evil dangers.
I'm sorry.
I have to tease you. You're learning, but I'm only saying this. Actually, this was actually just a way for me to backdoor myself into saying, hey, y'all, Kira has a dog now.
I wanted to talk about my dog maybe today too.
This is
I also got a dog, like, during the pandemic, and that it was 2 months ago. So
sure. Yeah. It turns out during the pandemic doesn't just mean 2020.
Yeah.
I think it means 2020 to 2025. Anything in this period of time. I know. It won't. It might. It won't. It might. Okay. So anyways, so bread. So I'm making rice. I started making rice cakes. Like, I make the rice and then take the leftover rice and like mix it with some egg and stuff, and then stick it in the pan. And you can make little rice cakes that you could put use and cheese if you want. Like, yeah. Again. Okay. So anyways,
huge if true that you can actually eat things.
So I was enjoying these things, and there's this show, and then this taps into another COVID reality. Television that doesn't trigger you. Okay. Television that doesn't have traumatic moments. Television that doesn't make you look out your window and wonder about your neighbors. Television that doesn't make you think about the worst elements of humanity. I assume you picked a couple of shows that did this for you during the pandemic. What were yours?
Well, we watched a lot of what we do in the shadows, which is a humorous vampire show.
Yes. Yeah, Taika Waititi on FX. I mean, I've only seen the movie. I haven't seen the show, but I hear it's brilliant.
Yeah, both the movie and the show are just lovely. I mean, it's filmed in that kind of documentary office style.
Yeah.
Again, just kind of silly. It's silly. It's light, even though it's about vampires.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely one of.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people did the Great British Baking Show.
I couldn't get into it. I tried. I couldn't get into it. Yeah. But I mean, we did Tiger King.
Yeah.
And that just made us feel like horrible people.
Mhm.
Like you
I
just
did a
feel like
lot of like
couldn't get
dating
it off you when it
reality
was over.
shows, like dating
I
reality,
couldn't
like
do those. I couldn't do
Married at
those.
First Sight and stuff, because I just needed that like very fluffy.
Right. Right. And so obviously like later, later pandemic, like in the Renaissance era of the pandemic, Ted Lasso emerged,
Mhm.
right? But I hadn't, just for me anyway, it probably came out earlier, but I found it then for me. But the thing, I think we're in the Rococo period of this pandemic, by the way. But the show that isn't a pandemic show, it's been around for a while, but it's a show called The Chef Show on Netflix.
Oh,
It's Jon Favreau,
yes.
who is, we need to talk about him someday. He's low-key one of the true heroes of our generation.
Did you see the movie Chef, like his movie?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So
Based kind of on that.
yeah. So essentially, when he was making this movie called Chef, which is also on Netflix, about a restaurateur who ends up starting a food truck, he connected with this famous LA food truck restaurateur named Roy Choi. Roy Choi is a Korean American chef in LA, runs a food truck. So anyhow, he's connecting with him. They become buddies while Roy is teaching him how to do this stuff. And we already know Jon Favreau is a foodie. He had a show on in IFC back in the day where he would just have people over for a meal and they'd sit around and talk. This guy's a foodie. He loves to eat. He loves to cook. He loves all that. Loves to entertain, hospitality, all that. So he and Roy Choi get back together and create this Netflix show where they just cook stuff together or go around and meet with chefs and watch them cook and learn how to do stuff. There's never a tense moment on the entire show. They're always happy. They love each other. Like there's no, like, it's not an odd couple at all. Like they just enjoy each other. There's no tension between them. Like Jon Favreau is incredibly respectful to Roy Choi. And so like, like when they're in the kitchen, they're talking and like Choi will tell him to do something and he'll be like, yes, chef. And like, do what he says. And then later they'll taste each other's food and talk. And I'm telling you, Kira, there are moments of the show where like they'll have cooked something and then they'll just sit there and they're like, eat a little bit of it. And just kind of look at each other. And then Roy Choi will just be like, yeah, that's good. That's good. And I was just like, it got me like paying attention to cooking again.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the episodes, he introduces Sam Raimi, the guy who directed the first Spider-Man movies that were like Tobey Maguire, and he did Evil Dead and Darkman and Drag Me to Hell and just Army of Darkness. And all, I mean, the guy's, kind of a cult hero. Anyways, he introduced him to making sourdough bread.
Oh.
And I was watching and I was like, I love sourdough bread. Like I love, like whenever I'm out, if I can get a patty melt on sourdough instead of rye, I'm like a very happy guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and there's something about it where it's like, it takes too long and it's like kind of annoying and kind of like difficult, but I take too long and I'm kind of annoying, kind of difficult. So I kind of appreciate that. So I didn't want to start baking like wheat bread or like loaves of bread. I didn't want to buy a bread making thing. I wanted to like have some bubbly weird thing in my house that I had to like take care of. Yeah. And I was super nervous about it. And whenever something sounds difficult, but I'm interested in it, the difficulty becomes more interesting to me. So a friend of mine and a parishioner who's on our vestry, he has some starter.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him if I could have some and he was like, have you ever done this before? And I was like, done what? He's like, sourdough. I was like, no. He's like, okay. You bake bread though? And I was like, no. And he's like, oh, kind of jumping in on the deep end here, huh?
Right.
I was like, I guess, let's go. And so he brought me some sourdough, gave me a recipe, and it just like immediately, I was in love with it. Not like immediately, like not trying to be in love with it, not like it was a very, very like deep, like hit me in a place from day one. I got very obsessed. I was baking bread every day. My wife it was not great for our marriage. At least not at first. Now I'm sure it's very good for our marriage, but it wasn't at first. But it just became this space that was like mine and me and this bread. And it wasn't about other people, although you end up making it because you make all this bread. And what are you going to do with it? You can't eat all of it.
Right.
So you start giving it away. So now I'm making bread and I'm giving bread away to parishioners. And I can't hang out with my parishioners because of COVID. So I'm dropping bread off at people's houses and looking at faces through the window or from the, driveway that I haven't seen face to face in months.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do? You already said it. What do we do on Sundays? We feed people bread. And by the way, hadn't been doing communion since March of 2020. And now it's August, September, October of 2020. And now I'm delivering bread to people's houses. Now, I didn't develop it in some sort of I wasn't going through the theology of this while I did it.
Right. Well, but I think that's part of the beauty of both of the simplicity of the Eucharist and of kind of what, Jesus' identification with himself as the bread of life is. I mean, it's certainly, we read it through a Eucharistic lens, but this whole discourse that Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And if you, believe in me, you'll never be hungry again. This comes after he literally feeds people with the, with the multiplication of loaves and fishes. So it's not, there's resonances there, even if you weren't like, I'm going to bake bread and deliver it to people and it'll be just like the Eucharist.
Right. It's hard to describe. People would send me notes and say thank you or something like that. And I always appreciated it. But you were talking about preaching this Sunday and how it felt a little vulnerable to you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to talk with you more about that later. But in some ways, this bread baking and even the act of giving it to people felt very vulnerable to me. I'm not a professional. I'd only been doing it for a month when I started giving it away. They might not have liked it. Like, I'm now at a place where I've made so many loaves of bread in 1 year. I mean, it's only been 1 year and it's now so much a part of my life. I think about it all the time. And then people, now I can tell you, by the way, unabashedly, I make good bread. I'm good at it. Mm-hmm. But like, that's not the point. Like, I'm not selling it. Like, right. I'm eating it. I'm giving it away. And I eat a lot of bread, friend. I had 2 pieces this morning.
Yeah.
But so the chef show happens. And then my favorite stand-up act of the last 5 years, which I've made you watch with, Tom Papa.
I quoted in my sermon this Sunday.
And he does this whole bit about, first of all, friends, there's a couple, I've watched it now probably 30 times, this one stand-up routine. I'm not kidding. I've got it kind of memorized. As I watch it now, I will say it's really heteronormative. It's very he's very kind of like old school, like white liberal dude, like kind of says some things that are like, you're like, all right. That being said, like none of us perfect. He's clearly a very good-hearted human being who's telling phenomenal jokes. And the crux of it is actually body acceptance and life acceptance. Like the push to actually accept yourself as you are, told through stand-up comedy. Right. Mm-hmm. And he's clearly struggled with weight throughout his life because he keeps talking about it. Right. Mm-hmm. So then he does that whole bit about like, look, we're going to gain weight. It's part of the deal. Right. He says, look at our lives. Like we made it to the top of the food chain. Nothing's trying to kill us. This was prior to the pandemic. Now something is definitely trying to kill us. But, and he does the whole, every day you go outside, we have everything's temperature controlled. He said, every day is a perfect temperature of 72 and snacky, But then he's like, and then that whole bit that he goes, I have friends that don't eat bread anymore. They don't eat bread. They don't eat bread.
Eat bread.
And I remember when he said that, I was just like, first of all, I was laughing. But then also I was like, holy smokes. Like I sit in this level, I just deprive myself of something. For what? For what? And he goes, you're going to lose 3.5 pounds. No one's going to notice. And you don't eat bread.
Yeah.
Right. He talks about his wife, came in and said I'm never eating sugar again. right? Because she's like, because she like ate sugar during throughout all the
holidays
holidays
or whatever.
like
Yeah.
like a monster.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm never gonna eat sugar again. He goes, yes, you are, and you're gonna eat more than you've ever eaten before. Which all the science around diets points to. If you do this to yourself in a radical way, you will just go back and do it more later and more than you've ever done it before.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, he does that whole bit, and he's just like, I can't imagine like you're not just gonna have a piece of toast with some butter on it. Like, not because you have celiac, just because you're not gonna die. You just have decided that that's bad, right? So anyways, there's definitely like a spiritual aspect to this for me. There's definitely a religious aspect, not in the traditional sense of like connected to Christianity, but traditional for me, but religious in the like the truest sense of the word of like, I have a ritual, I bind myself to this thing and I feed this starter and I do this thing, and it's a part of the way that I operate in the world now. And I give it away to people, and it's a part of me. Like, and now I'm sounding a little bit too weird and vulnerable, but it's meaningful.
Yeah.
And it's just completely changed. Like, the weirdest thing about it, Kira, is I can tell you that it's changed my life completely, but I can't tell you how.
Right.
Like people be like, oh, this changed my life. How did it change your life? Oh, well, it gave me this perspective. And if you were like, I'm like, it changed my life. And you're like, how? I'll be like, I used to not make bread, and now I do. Like,
and now I make bread.
Right.
But
I'm a bread maker now.
I think there's something, and I feel this because I also enjoy cooking, and part of it is that like the work that we do is so long term, and it can be so subtle, and we rarely get like
good
a thing that we can hold up and say, I did this thing, I made this progress.
Yep.
And when I make, I remember, I think it was May 2020, and I did so one of my favorite kind of TV chef shows is Samin Nosrat's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. And she did a whole thing with the New York Times of like, we're all going to make a big lasagna this weekend. And so I made, for maybe my first time ever, like I didn't do the noodles myself because I was trying to minimize some of that, but I did the tomato sauce, from scratch. And
yeah.
And it took a lot of time to make this lasagna. To make all the individual components, and then to layer it, and then to bake it. And it was delicious. And at the end, I had a huge lasagna that
could feed all of these people that you love.
And kind of like you. I mean, we have some friends who live close by to us, and we said, we've got all this lasagna. Do you want some? And so took some over to them. And there is something that I need in my life of kind of, because our work is so intangible, that I need something tangible to like hold and say, like, I did this thing, and I think for some people it's knitting, or for some people it's whatever else you might do.
Making something.
That kind, or making a coffee table, or woodworking. But to kind of be able to hold something and say, like, I put in X amount of hours, and at the end I have this thing. Whereas our work, and a lot of people's work, really is like, I put in X amount of hours, and what did I do? Like, I wrote some emails. I held someone's hand while they're dying. Like, there is, which
is all awesome
stuff. Yeah.
The emails were very important.
Yes.
Holding someone's hand while they're dying is, I mean, an amazing honor.
Yeah.
But like, what do you have to show for it?
Right.
So having the gratification of having a physical thing that you can give to people, or that you can consume yourself, that you can appreciate and enjoy, is a gift. And my involvement with that, it should, like, I need to go back and look at this bread of life language, and like, look at the bread. What is Jesus saying about himself? What is he saying about himself in terms of nourishment? Because it's not just a simple statement of Jesus is the one who gives you some sort of the right amount of spiritual calories, so that you are fed appropriately. There's, like, as you just said, like the time, the commitment, the care, and the community that is built into this takes it to all of those places, Our friend Chris is on. He's on twice. He's the communications minister of the Episcopal Diocese of San Diego.
All right.
Yeah. And he asks a question, favorite bread and why? So Chris, I need clarification. Do you mean favorite bread that I make, or favorite bread that I've ever had, or favorite bread like to get? And like what I need you to go deeper. Like, talk to me about what you mean by favorite bread. Because I have lots of feelings about bread now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see if he says anything while we talk about that.
So,
what were you going to say?
Oh, well, I was going to say, one of the funny things about just kind of food and hunger and nourishment is that like there's a saying that hunger is the best sauce, right?
Yeah.
And there, I've had a lot of fancy meals in my life and traveled, in Europe and had amazing food. And I will still tell you that the best thing I have ever eaten was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich after I ran a marathon in Huntsville, Alabama. And it was on this like fresh bakery, like thick wheat bread that was just the right texture, like good peanut butter, good jelly. And that sandwich was just like manna from heaven.
A good peanut butter and jelly on wheat bread is for me like, I had one the other day for lunch in the pool. I was at the local pool and I sat on the side. You're not supposed to eat in the pool, but I had like a big old Diet Coke and I had this like, and I like it like it was made a couple hours ago and then it was stuck in the fridge. And then it's like, but yeah, eating something like that right after you run or after you do some kind of work is crazy and wonderful. My favorite bread that I make is it's what would be called a rustic loaf or a country loaf, or some people would just say sourdough. It is. So I have a sourdough starter, which sourdough is actually a slang term, right? It's really an active live yeast that I'm keeping alive. Pool PB&J. It's almost like you're a dad, Chris says. Yeah, no. I was wearing a swim shirt and a hat to cover my bald head and drinking a soda. And if I'd had a beer, it could have been one more level of dad, but I was drinking a Diet Coke and a PB&J and telling my kids, don't go near there. I was peak dad, like my kid was like, I'm tired. And I'm like, hi, tired. I'm dad. It was that level of dad. Right. But this kind of basic sourdough is my favorite thing. I have made breads I have active dry yeast that you buy at the store and it's the little pellets and you dump them in. Mm-hmm. I've made some bread with that. I can make some pretty good bread with that. I don't enjoy making it as much for some reason. And I don't always enjoy the taste as much, although I can make some bread that I have enjoyed. But that basic like sourdough, and I use a couple different kinds of flour, rustic or country loaf is my favorite thing. I make a ciabatta, I make a focaccia, I make pizza dough. The pizza is actually quite good. I'm pleased with that. There's a Mexican, essentially baguette called birote that you make. You put beer and lime in the dough while you're making it, and it makes it, and then you really cook the heck out of it. So it like the outside is really crunchy and the inside is just like soft. And then it's made for wet sandwiches. So you douse them in sauce and they don't break down. Those are delicious. I've made some olive oil and sea salt loaf, and there's a few different things. I haven't never made like a normal traditional French baguette yet. I got to work on that. But apparently my focaccia, my rosemary focaccia, my favorite thing to give people is a big bowl, like a big loaf, like round loaf of sourdough bread. I love the way they look. I love the way they taste. I love handing them to people. But apparently the focaccia that I make, which is followed from a recipe in a book by a guy named Brian Ford, it is a focaccia with a sourdough or live yeast starter, leaven. Apparently that's the best thing I make. Like everybody's just like, keep doing that. Never stop. Don't ever stop. Keep bringing me that. It's great day of. The texture is not as good the next day. Still tastes good, but the texture is not as good. But my sourdough loaf, it tastes good for like 5 days.
Yeah.
And then you can like slice it and put it in the freezer and pull a piece out and stick it in a toaster. And it's like that's my jam. I love it. But I can send you some in San Diego, Chris. It'll cost a little bit to overnight it, but if you ask nicely. I have a friend in LA actually that he literally sent me instructions on how to overnight bread across the country.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, all right, Mr. Subtle, like, let's see what I can do.
Yeah.
But anyways, do you talk to me a little bit about, like, do you make any bread or do you bake in any particular way?
So again, as part of my kind of healing from my, I hesitate to call it kind of an eating disorder because people have an idea of what that looks like, but my disordered eating is maybe more accurate. I definitely have started, one of the reasons, right, during the pandemic that people started making so much sourdough bread was because yeast was really hard to find. So people had to kind of use like natural light. Right. But I remember I was at Costco and kind of early on in the pandemic, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. And there was a big packet of active dry yeast. And I was like, I'm getting it. Like, I don't actually bake any yeasted breads right now, but like, what if I need to start, like, we're going to need to have yeast. So I purchased that. And then I had all this yeast, and I did start at the beginning of this year doing a lot of pizza and pizza doughs, and this like recipe from King Arthur flour that is like a deep dish. Like, you cook it in a cast iron skillet, and it is like, it's like you use a fold to kind of, you don't actually knead it. And then you it's a slow cold rise. And it's just a delicious, makes a delicious pizza. Not like a thin, like New York style pizza, and not like a Chicago casserole either, pizza, but just like a really good, like Italian pizza. And then I do,
I want to try that.
I do some cinnamon rolls from time to time. And the other thing that kind of got me doing this was that my husband, sort of a little bit before the pandemic, but also during the pandemic, got into woodworking and lathing. And so he had made me a beautiful French rolling pin. So a French rolling pin is kind of it's just one piece of wood.
Yeah. It doesn't have the rollers. It's just a beautiful,
Yeah. And so I was like, I want to use this rolling pin, and started doing a little bit more baking. Now that things have kind of picked up again, I haven't done.
That's an area, kneading bread, rolling, any of those things I'm not good at.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I like the breads that I make, almost all of them are no knead. Almost all of them require, like, they're really focused on like some very primitive or primal, whatever you want to call it, like very basic shaping techniques, and allowing the oven to kind of do what it needs to do. I'm really like, when I tried to make a quiche the other day, it tasted good. It did actually taste good. And I made the crust and it worked out. It wasn't pretty. Like, the like little pretty, like it looks like all like ruffly.
Yeah.
Mine did not look like that. So I would, by the way, while we were talking about this on the most interesting episode of this show that we've ever done, and not at all self-indulgent. By the way, we're so self-indulgent. Leslie doesn't even have a question for us. She's like, I got nothing for you guys. She's like, I can't even, nothing. I'm just gonna, I'll just have you on in the background and work on something, because this is ridiculous. I was just thinking while you were talking that we need to do. Like, we need to get some families that we love together, or maybe just your family and mine. And we need to see, and we need to do a vacation where we like stay in a house somewhere with like a really nice kitchen. And like, let's just plan meals, and like, let's unabashedly plan our day around meals and not feel guilty about it. And just be like, this day we make lasagna.
Yeah.
And like,
yeah. Because there's something really lovely about, and I've always loved this, feeding other people and feeding, gathering people around a table and being nourished both by food and by the conversation and the camaraderie. And I I think it's so 2 years ago we just moved into our house, and that November for Thanksgiving we
Has it been
hosted
2
our
years?
first- yeah.
Have you been with Michael for more than 2 years?
Yeah.
Man.
We weren't married though, so
No, but I won't tell. Listen, I'm not going to tell anyone. Go ahead.
But we hosted our first Thanksgiving together, and my parents came, and we had friends come, and my best friend and her husband were in town, and we had maybe like 10 people around this huge table I bought off of Facebook Marketplace. And it was so fun. And then, a few short months later, we were kind of in lockdown, and I just kept holding on to that memory of like, I don't really remember what we ate. I think there was turkey. I think there, my best friend's husband, John, made a really good stuffing. My mom brought her normal cranberry stuff. Like, it was great. It was just so good to be together and to have a noisy house full of conversation, and a bunch of people brought their dogs, and like, it was just, it was just so great. And I miss that, even though we're able to do a little bit more kinds of things like that these days, for the time being, maybe. That feeling is something I in the best of circumstances, is what kind of communion should be, both in and out of the church.
That's a big thing for me, is what do we mean when we talk about communion? Like, what do we mean? Like, what, and you just described communion in a real world setting. And you just described communion in a real world setting. And I think for people like you and I, it's our temptation and our vocation among our colleagues to treat the Eucharist, treat communion like this is the apex of our religiosity right here. This is the climax of the pinnacle is communion. And there's something about like the sacraments that can feel very inward focused, but the sacraments are at their best when they help us look outward and recognize how sacramental the whole world is. So communion is beautiful when it nourishes you on Sunday. It's also even more beautiful when, after nourishing you on Sunday, it nourishes you in a way that you're able to recognize other meals as communion. And I want to be careful here, because I don't, some people will say like, oh, I don't, you don't need to go to church to be church, or like, church isn't about Sunday. No, I think you need to gather with your people and worship, and Sunday matters tremendously. And what we do actually is deeply formative to your heart and soul and mind and body. And also, if Sunday is the only time you're experiencing communion, and the communion you experience on Sunday isn't seeping out, overflowing, super overabounding, as Paul says, in spilling over into the rest of your world in abundance, and helping you recognize communion with others on other times, then then you are not paying attention to the meal that you're being served on Sundays.
Yeah, it's certainly it's a starting point, right? Like, we are fed, and then we go out, to feed others, and sometimes even ourselves, if we have been depriving ourselves of nourishment.
Yeah.
As many of us kind of do throughout our lives, because of ideas around what our bodies should and should not look like.
And so what we try to do, Kira, is we try to it's something that we talk about in our group, in our little show a lot, is you and I think, work hard in our conversations anyway, to break down the barriers that people think exist between supposedly secular and spiritual. The Christian should not believe in anything actually being secular, because it suggests there's anywhere where God isn't. But we want to use what we believe, people like you and I believe, is that our experience, our ritualized and formalized corporate experience, is important. And also it's supposed to be informed by our life outside. And also it is supposed to inform our life outside. So that's to say, like, the lines should be a little bit blurry. And so when Chris asks the questions, what's the difference between Eucharist and communion? Right? He said there's a difference between Eucharist and communion, in my opinion. Well, growing up in the Lutheran church, we would have just called it communion. The first time I ever heard Eucharist, I did. So I was going to this church that Chris knows in California when I first became an Episcopalian, and I was like, oh, good, this is one of those Sundays where they have communion. And then I went the next Sunday and I was like, wow, 2 weeks in a row, communion. And then the third week I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You guys 3 weeks in a row. And someone was like, I'm like, do they do communion every Sunday? And they were like, yeah, it's called the Holy Eucharist. That's the service. We literally had a service called the Holy Eucharist. And I was like, great. What's Eucharist? And they're like, it's communion. And I was like, oh, you named the service after it? This is awesome. I was so excited. So, I think Eucharist, Mass, I would never call it that because I'm not one of those people. I'm a Protestant. But Eucharist, Mass, Lord's Last Supper, Lord's Supper. I'm not a big supper person. I try not to. I'm a dinner guy. I think all of these words, communion.
Right. First of all, I mean, Eucharist, of course, for those of you who didn't, take Greek or whatever, that is a word that basically comes out of the Greek word for Thanksgiving. So
the Great Thanksgiving is what we call.
Yeah, we often call the elements the Eucharist, the bread and the wine, we call it the Eucharist, but it's really the whole service that's the Eucharist. I mean, in the Book of Common Prayer, you look it up and it says like, this is the service for the Holy Eucharist. I find communion, I think, is a little more ecumenically understood, which is where I kind of use that word when I'm talking to a mixed audience, maybe, or somebody who might have different theology around what happens in that moment. Certainly a lot of our more low church Protestant brethren and sistren.
Ooh, sistren.
Well, especially in other denominations, they view it more as a remembrance meal, as something that, there's not anything that happens in the bread and the wine, that it's just something that we do because Jesus kind of told us to do it.
I have lots of feelings about that, but yes, correct. So we have these different names. I think the larger issue for me, to respond to Chris as best I can, is and actually goes into what Leslie was asking, because Leslie was asking about some of the rules that are around communion. When she and I were together last Sunday, we were talking about some of those things. And, this is where things get really interesting to me. Well, the whole thing's interesting. I'm interested in everything we've talked about so far, but there's the lines are blurred between ritual and spontaneity of like just daily life, between what we would call sort of set apart and that which is everyday mundane. That we have very specific codified rituals for the purpose, I think, of uniformity and some not by the way, I should say unity and some level of uniformity, like common ground that we all stand on by sharing a specific understanding of a way to do a thing. It's culture. This is how culture is created. Doing the same thing over and over again and then agreeing with another group of people that we're going to keep doing it this way, that is culture. That's what culture is, right? So rituals are one of the great sort of creators of culture. And culture is every group, every tribe, every people. Like culture is a central aspect of helps define what that culture is. So if our defining feature is our being given a gift by God that nourishes us and feeds us and gives us equipment to head out into the world, and that thing that we're nourished by is God's self, and empowering us to live into our incarnation as the body of Christ as a people in the world. This defining thing should bleed out into all that we do. And so then we can informally talk about communion and then formally talk about communion and use the same word to mean both, and just be messy, difficult to understand people, because we're Episcopalians and we always are.
Yeah, well, and I think we can talk about Eucharistic living as a touchstone for our living. It's not just the thing that happens when we gather around the altar, but it's a whole posture of thanksgiving and of recognizing the holiness around us. And I think part of me to kind of, I'm not kind of going to wrap up our conversation, but kind of put a little return to some themes. Part of what I preached about this Sunday was about, God gives us these things to nourish our bodies. And there's one of my parishioners who comes from the Church of the Nazarene called the Spirit of the Age, that tells us to deny ourselves, to restrict, to shrink our bodies, to not live into kind of the fullness when God has spread this table for us of bread and of tastiness and beauty. And, God has given us this wonderful, all of the wonderful things that God gives us. And, that to recognize those things and to live in thanksgiving of them and appreciation of them, I think is kind of what we start to touch on by talking about like Eucharistic living, that we're all kind of blessed and broken open and given, offered up to the world. So.
And there tends to be an either or attitude in a lot of our lives where people say either you only find that in church or it's not in church, it's out in the world. And I think that attitude is unfortunate because I think the reality is these things feed each other. Mm-hmm. For the Christian, our corporate worship and gathered experience feeds the rest of our lives. And the rest of our lives are the things that we come back and offer to the group and to God on a Sunday, like Abel offers his sacrifice, like the people gather together and they offer up, this is what we've got. You give your whole self. And so these things, and I love that idea of Eucharistic living. There's a really good book called Guide to the Sacraments by John or Ian McCullough, Welsh writer. And he refers to Jesus as the primordial sacrament because Jesus is an outward and visible sign of an inward and practical or real grace, the grace of God embodied in the real world. And that's what we're talking about. If the sacramental living, if the Eucharistic living helps you live with thanksgiving in the recognition of God's active presence in the world and in your life, setting you apart for blessing and being blessed, and recognizing the blessing in the world, this I think is what we're getting at. And then when you see that place, to wrap it back, to bring it back to where we were, when you find blessing in something that you had been told was bad. In my case, look, I am cisgender, heterosexual, white Christian male. Okay. Very few people in the history of the world who've had any power have told me anything about me is wrong. Like, I mean, I'm short and chubby and bald. Those are all things that people make fun of me for, but that's pretty minor compared to what you and many other people deal with for being different from that sort of privileged reality. But my experience of finding something that I had believed somehow had inculcated into my life that this thing is bad, and then it turns out it's a major blessing, is revelatory. And if that's true for like little old me with some bread, I think that can be good news and liberating on a much deeper level for people about their gender, about their color, about their identity, about their sexuality, about their being, about who I am, about what you're given. Like there's so many things that you have been, that there's just so have been conditioned in you to believe that this thing is separate from anything God loves. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be loved, you've got to get to this place. And the revelation, I mean, the reason so many people have left the church is frankly because they've realized that they are blessed and they're tired of being told they're cursed for things that are actually blessed. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen.
Preach I can discover that on a very simple level with bread. Great. I love that. But that's the point. Like there's nothing too mundane that you can't find a revelatory example of God's loving presence in it.
Yes.
And bread could be, and I can make bread about myself just sitting at the kitchen taking care of it and walleye and not pay attention to my family. And then feel like, but I'm making bread for people, even though they're no one, my house is like, we get it. Nobody wants it anymore. Or yesterday, a couple days ago, my daughter was like, can I help? And I was like, yes. And then I started to teach her. And then it became something else. And that's like, we can even get up. And that's why I'm saying, like, I don't want to just talk on a thing all by myself. I want to talk with Kira and with you guys. And I don't want to just bake something all by myself. I want to sit in a kitchen next to you and like work on something together and then share it. Like that to me is like net. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the Jesus life. Right? Next week, 2 things. One, Leslie, we're going to talk about the rules around communion. Why we're not allowed to use little plastic disposable cups for wine. We're going to talk about some of that stuff. Okay. 2, friends, we're talking about vaccinations next week. Okay. We're going to talk all about it. So you might have questions about it. We might come out hot like we did today and talk about one thing for the whole time. But if you have any questions about vaccinations and vaccines, or you want us to riff or discuss or go deep into any specific aspect of vaccines, vaccinations, vaccinating, anti-vax, I just want to keep saying that word. Anything like that, anything surrounding that, we want to talk about. We're going to get into it.
And encourage you to, if you have not gotten your COVID-19 vaccine yet, to talk with us, talk with others who can address some of your concerns. And it's free, it's available. You can get it a lot of different places. We would be happy to help you schedule an appointment, get you to where you need to go. If we're nearby, and get that going for you.
If you are a person who has any kind of skepticism whatsoever about this particular vaccine or about vaccines writ large, but you are actually interested in talking with a professional about it one-on-one, I have a person on speed dial I will connect you with. If you email me, whether you're a member of my church or not, if you email me, I will connect you with a friend of mine, or several different friends that I have that are professionals that will not shame you, that will keep the conversation confidential, that will talk it through with you and help you kind of figure out what you really think and make sure you have the data to help you understand your beliefs in that, so that you're not just being pushed by people like us to get the vaccine, although we really do want you to, I'm not going to lie. But if you want to talk to someone about, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but if you want to talk to someone about that, with no commitment necessary, please, oh my goodness, please message one of us and we will get you in touch with someone. We got to go, but Kira, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but just off the top of my head, what you been listening to lately?
What have I been listening to lately?
Musically, what you got?
Gosh, I feel like I'm a broken record in a way, but I'm really liking this artist and this song. Her name is Maddie Diaz, and her song is New Person, Old Place. And it's just really been doing it for me. Again, that kind of like female singer-songwriter, folky kind of lady music.
I'm listening to this song. I'm going to listen to this song today on the way to lunch.
Okay. It's one of those songs that even my husband, like, I was like playing music while I was cooking and it came on and he was like, oh, what's this song?
Even this.
Like, so it even caught his ear,
I love it. I can't wait to listen. Maddie Diaz. I'm going to listen to that. It was the 20th anniversary of one of the great records of our lifetime. Gillian Welch's album, Time the Revelator, came out in 2001. Mm-hmm. It is a stunning masterpiece and still not my favorite album of hers, but it's a stunning masterpiece of an album. I would listen to Gillian Welch. I did this week. I would if I were you. I've been digging into David Bowie specifically. I listened to a bunch of his stuff, but I've been getting back to the basics of his Ziggy Stardust album. I played that all the way through. And I've been listening to a lot of Joni Mitchell lately. And then I was jumping back into some Cannonball Adderley, trying to get my jazz back on. I have a very interesting love-hate relationship with jazz. I'm not all in, but I'm certainly not all out.
Yeah, it's definitely it's something for me that as somebody who I would say that I like jazz, but I am also very particular about
Yes.
the kind of jazz I
Yes.
like, and the instrumentation of the jazz I like.
Yes.
So
it's such
the
a
other thing,
big.
yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna sneeze maybe. The other thing I've been listening to, I did not grow up in a kind of Christian environment where I listened to a lot of contemporary Christian music.
Right.
So I've been kind of catching up on some Jars of Clay.
No way. You've been listening to Jars of Clay?
In part because Stephen Mason, who is one of the lead Jars of Clay guys, is a friend of mine, an Episcopalian in the diocese.
Wow. Is he new to the Episcopal Church, or was he Episcopalian when he wrote that "Rain for 40 Days" song?
He was not an Episcopalian then, but he's been in the Episcopal Church for a little while. He is also at our local soccer club games. He dresses up as Soccer Moses, and
I love it. I love it. I can't believe he's an Episcopalian now.
Yeah, several of the Jars of Clay guys are. He's not the only one.
He, you know what? He got an IRA and a Volvo, and he was like, you know what? I might be an Episcopalian. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. You got to listen to them. Do they have new stuff out?
I don't know if they have new stuff out, but they've been. I mean, they do some stuff around. They tour a little bit, and
I gotta check them out. I gotta check it out. And then I went to the opera on Saturday in the park.
Ooh.
And I thought of you because I'm like, I bet Kira would be down for this.
Yes.
Opera in the park, and it was Tosca, except instead of 3 hours long, it was only 90 minutes long. So I'm sure you have. Yeah, it was great. It was great.
I have to say, even as somebody who loves opera, we're no longer in a society where like that's the only thing to do.
3 or 4 hours for something. Even like I'm a big movie buff and I like long movies. And I'm like, Martin Scorsese, like you don't need for a movie to be 3 to 4 hours long. What would it look like if I told you could only make a 2-hour movie? What would you do? What would you do with your time? I kind of want to like limitations. I'm trying to make my sermons shorter. I'm trying to get us done sooner, which I'm not doing a good job of. Like limitations, people, limitations. All right. So I'm going to listen to Maddie Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
And do you listen to David Bowie at all?
A little bit.
Okay. Dig the Ziggy Stardust album. And the very first song is called 5 Years. And you should listen and then like maybe listen again with the lyrics in hand.
Okay.
And you'll be like, oh,
this is what,
oh boy, it's a perfect song for COVID tide. It's anyway, dig in. And then we'll report back. And then next week, vaccinations and communion rules, friends.
And we'd love to get your questions.
Yes.
If we don't talk about them next week, we've got lots of weeks ahead of us. And we hope that you will join us next week if you listen in.
Yes.
And we are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. I got it right that time.
You did beautifully. All right, friends. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful week. Take care of each other, and we'll talk soon.